So, let's talk about Proposition 13. As we learned this week, Proposition 13, passed in 1978 in the state of California, has had a lasting impact on the budget for local governments. I know you read about it and watched the video about it, but I want to give a micro lecture about Prop 13 to make sure you have a solid understanding of what it did, why voters supported it, and why they might regret having supported it now. As a reminder, Prop 13 changed a few key items for homeowners in the state of California. It requires a property tax rate of 1%. It requires that properties be assessed at market value at the time of a sale. And finally, it allows property assessments to increase by no more than 2% per year until the house is sold again. This means that as long as property values increase by more than 2% per year, then homeowners gain from staying in the same house because their property taxes are lower than they would be on a different house of the same value. Basically, every time a house is sold, a new base year value is established because the property is reassessed. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. More importantly, this initiative also restricted the government's ability to raise revenue through property taxes for cities, counties, and, in my opinion, the most important group, schools. Since then, we have seen an increase of measures and initiatives within school districts or cities and counties to raise money for projects, new buildings, repairs, etc. Voters also determine if those measures pass as well. June 2018 marked 40 years since Proposition 13 was passed by voters with 65% support. That is a very high number, even though it may not seem that way. In 2020, there was an initiative on the ballot called Proposition 15 that would have unraveled parts of Proposition 13. It would have amended the state constitution to require commercial and industrial properties, not just residential properties, to be taxed based on their market value rather than their purchase price. This would have increased tax revenue in the state, with 60% slated to go to local governments and special districts, and the other 40% towards school districts and community colleges. Side note, only 11% of the 40% would have gone to community colleges. Yikes. Before Proposition 13 was passed, local property taxes were the main source of K-12 funding, and school districts were able to supplement the per-pupil funding given to them from the state by using those property taxes. In the years after Proposition 13 passed, property tax revenue dropped by almost 60%. 60%. 60%. That's a lot. Cuts were heavy across the board, and teacher strikes even sprang up throughout the state. When adjusted for inflation, get this, California spent about $7,400 per student in 1977, about $1,000 above the national average, according to data collected by the National Center for Education Statistics. By 1983, California's per-student spending had dropped to $6,700, dipping below the national average, where it has generally stayed since then. Between 1970 and 1997, per-student spending in California fell more than 15% relative to spending in other states, and that is according to a report from the Public Policy Institute of California. So not only did Prop 13 fund education, but other areas like parks, roads, local fire and police departments, and infrastructure projects were funded as well. When property taxes decrease, so do funds for those areas. As you heard in the PBS video on the last page, Proposition 13 also made it difficult for state government to implement any kind of new taxes in the future. Why? Because Proposition 13 requires a 2/3 majority in both chambers of the state legislature for all increases in state tax rates, including personal income taxes. This proposition amended the Constitution of California and has made it increasingly difficult for state government to balance its budget. Just like I said in one of the lecture pages, we want great schools. and smooth roads and awesome first responders and nice parks to take our kids to. But we don't want to pay for it. When the state legislature has to get at least 2/3 majority vote in both chambers of Congress, both chambers of the state legislature to raise taxes, things get challenging. Nobody wants to spend more money. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. But we want, again, nice parks, good roads, great schools, community college instructors and classes. So where is the balance between the two? Prop 13 was great at the time, but has it lived up to its expectations?